Actually, this is a story you may have already heard. You may know this. So once upon a time, actually a long, long, long time ago, back when there was nothing, God created everything. God created everything there possibly is. Okay? So he, everything from, trees and plants and mountains and all that stuff, all the way down to mosquitoes. I don't know why God made mosquitoes, but we'll leave that for another time. But anyway, so God makes everything, and he makes a man and a woman, and that's our, if you will, our parents, if you will, from way, way back when. And everything was perfect. I guess the mosquitoes didn't bite you back then. I don't know. But anyway, everything was perfect, and things were going along well. But one day, this serpent, like a snake, I know this sounds weird, but the snake started talking. That's just odd. But anyway, the snake says to Eve, hey, so tell me about this thing with God. Because God had told them they had the whole garden, this beautiful place, all to themselves. And they said, you can do what you want, eat of any of the fruit of the trees, all that stuff. But God said, hey, that tree right in the middle of the garden, don't touch that. That is not good for you. Don't eat that. And I guess up till that point, Adam and Eve were like, yeah, okay, fine. But the serpent says to Eve, so what did God tell you about this thing? And she says, well, he said, if we eat it, we'll die. And the serpent says, you won't die. Oh, no, you won't die. Have you ever had anybody, they want you to do something, it's not right, and then they say to you, oh, it's okay, we won't get caught. Something like that. Well, that's kind of what the serpent did to Eve, and suddenly he put this little bit of doubt in Eve's mind. Like, well, maybe it's not that big a deal. Maybe God is trying to trick me. Maybe God is just trying to, take away my fun or something like that. And so Eve and Adam, they give in and they eat of that tree. And we call that original sin, that was the first sin. That was the first time that somebody didn't trust God, didn't choose God. It was a terrible thing. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Anyway, the point here is that you and I, sadly, we have this same tendency. We have this same tendency, we know that, God tells us, listen to your parents. And we know that, and we know that's good. And yet, somewhere there's this voice that says to us, you don't actually have to listen to your parents all the time. And we sort of believe that. And when we do that, it's like we don't trust God. And so you always want to trust God, as hard as it is sometimes. So you always want to do the right thing, because the right thing is what we know God wants us to do. Okay? It's a terrific story. A lot to learn from it. Okay? Thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Why don't you guys head back to your seats. For the adults, if I could just add 2 points. I don't know for a fact, of course, but there's a chance, actually a pretty good chance, that some of you are sitting here going, okay, that's just cute. Neat little story, talking snake sort of stuff. And you're thinking, like it's a myth, it's a legend, and it doesn't actually matter. Because after all, if you think it's not true, if you think it did not happen, it's easy to dismiss it. But let me see if I can help you with that for just a moment. You and I, living as we do in this day and age, we think of history differently than did ancient peoples. So just to give you an example, if I was going to tell you about the Battle of Gettysburg, the pivotal battle of the Civil War, you would expect me to give you a whole lot of facts. So you'd expect me to tell you when it happened, the exact days on which this battle happened. You would expect me to tell you something about the sides, who fought, the generals on both sides. You would expect me to be able to tell you what happened on each of the days. And if I did not know the exact number, say, of people that were in a given part of the battle, you'd expect me to admit that. You'd want me to say, well, there was about 300 people in this place at that moment. You would expect all these facts, and then out of those facts, you would expect some lesson, some conclusion, some point. So if, for example, I wanted to try to share with you that I thought it was the pivotal battle of the war, then I would have told you all these facts, and then I'd go to the point. Ancients, when they would write history, it was almost like they thought of it backwards from that. They didn't start with facts. They started with the point, the story. What is it that I'm trying to convey? What is the historical, if you will, lesson I'm trying to convey? So just to give you an example with the Adam and Eve story, the ancients, writing this story, many of you know this question. People will say, wait, I never understood the story. Because Adam and Eve had two boys, Cain and Abel, and then later Seth. And then suddenly it talks about them getting married. Where did the girls come from? All right. But see, what you're thinking is you're thinking sort of modern history. You're thinking history is about all these facts and, I need all the facts so I can get a point out of it. But the ancients would have looked at your question, where did the girls come from? And they just like, does it matter? Because that's not the point of the story. The point that is being made in that story is something different. It just doesn't matter whether there are girls, that where they came from or not, how that worked out. Same thing with the talking serpent. I mean, for some people it's like, yeah, right, talking snakes, okay. But it's not the issue. And when you and I get caught up in these details, we have a tendency to miss the point. And so you have two approaches when you're looking at stories like this. There's certainly lots of people who will believe that it happened precisely the way it's described. That's fine. And it could happen. I mean, if you don't believe in a God that can make a snake talk, you need to get a new God, because your God isn't very powerful. So it surely could have happened precisely the way it is described. But it doesn't have to have happened precisely that way, because the people that wrote this for us, they're trying to make a point. They're trying to teach us something. And that's what we really want to go after. What's the point? What is the lesson? What is the historical lesson? And all those other things, well, maybe it's interesting to talk about. And what is the point? It's the point I tried to make for the kids. Adam and Eve make a terrible choice. They don't trust God. And you and I, we do the same thing. Father Brad and I agreed for Lent, our theme, you may have remembered it from the bulletin last week, is salvation, the story of us. Adam and Eve is the beginning story of salvation. Had it not happened, we wouldn't be in need of salvation, but it did. And so it's important that we know this story, that we sort of have some sense, at least, of how it started. That it started because man and woman did not choose to trust God. But it is also the story of us. This is not just ancient history. You and I, the salvation, it is our story as well. Because do we not, you and I, have a talking snake in our heads sometimes that tells us stuff that is just wrong, that it teaches us not to trust God? Just take, for example, our money. The good Lord tells us throughout the Bible all sorts of wonderful things and commandments about money and what we should do and how we should handle it. But what do we have? We got this voice that says, wait, that's just God trying to get the money out of your pocketbook. You earned that money. That's your money. This stuff about stewardship, don't listen to that. It's your money. And the voice will also tell you, hey, I saw the inflation index last week, getting kind of bad. You could run out. You could run out of money. You don't want to run out of money. And that voice, sadly, not always thankfully, but sometimes we listen to that voice. We hear it and we go, oh, you're right, yeah. And not just with money, you could think of 100 examples. Whether that's about our sexuality and how we live that out, whether that's about forgiveness, whether that is how we treat one another, is just all sorts of ways by which we got this voice that's tempting us all the time to say, God's not trustworthy in this. You're probably better off doing what you think is best. So salvation story, the history of salvation, it is our story. And over the next few weeks, as we go through the readings of Lent, that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at this story, not only historically, sort of what happened, but we're going to make sure that we understand that it is our story. Because the best part of this story is not that Adam and Eve sinned. And the best part is God did not leave it that way, which is also true of us. God could have said to us at any time when we choose against him, he could just look at him and go like, wait, okay, if that's what you're choosing, I'm done. And he could disappear out of our lives. But he never does that, of course. He's always willing to accept us back. And we say, God, that decision I made, I don't know what I was thinking about. I was just dumb. And then God will forgive us. And God will bring us back. That's the story we want to get to. And that's the story we want to celebrate at Easter. That's the story that our soon-to-be elect, as they are called, are embracing as they seek to join the church. And so if you allow me, we're just going to move straight into this. So I'll invite Steve forward. He's going to introduce those that we're going to send to the bishop in a few minutes.